Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Awesome. Today we're going to be tackling something I think a lot of people are going to connect with. It's this whole world of digital minimalism.
hmm
And we're going to be looking at the book Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport.
Excellent book.
Yeah, have you read it?
Oh, yeah, cover to cover.
Okay, cool. I think we've all had that feeling, right? Like we're just overwhelmed with technology.
Absolutely.
Our phones, our computers, everything's beeping at us all the time. But what if there was like a better way?
Yeah, right.
Like, what if there was a way to use these things more intentionally? So it's not like they're using us,
I mean, that's the core message of the book. It's not saying technology is bad.
right?
It's about using it intentionally to actually improve your life, not just getting sucked in.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And this idea of getting sucked in, it's not just like one bad app or anything.
No.
It's just this constant, like, pull on our attention from every direction.
Yeah, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And, Andrew Sullivan, in that essay he wrote for New York Magazine, he even called himself a manic information addict.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty intense.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong statement.
Definitely makes you think, right?
Yeah, it does. It's kind of scary, actually.
Yeah,
And I feel like a lot of us feel that exhaustion with technology.
right.
It's like we woke up one day and our phones were like this extra limb,
Yeah.
but we never really chose that,
We didn't, did we?
No, we kind of just, I don't know, we just kind of ended up here.
We did, and that's one of the things the book tries to dig into is like, how did we get here? And
Yeah.
how much of it was really a conscious choice?
Yeah.
And, Cal Newport suggests that a lot of it has to do with the way the tech industry actually operates.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
He uses this really great analogy from Bill Maher,
Okay.
who compares these tech companies to tobacco farmers and T-shirts.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's basically saying they're creating these addictive products.
But like, how do they actually do that?
Well, he talks about Tristan Harris,
Okay.
who's a former Google engineer. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was actually featured in a 60-minute segment
Oh, okay.
about this thing called brain hacking,
Wow. Okay.
which is really fascinating. So Harris, he was working on designing these addictive interfaces
Like at Google.
at Google.
Wow. Okay.
And he came to this realization that these companies, they're engineering these products to keep us hooked,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's not good for us.
So it's not just me being weak-willed. It's like, it's by design.
It's totally by design.
Right.
Like you think about slot machines, for example.
Right.
They're designed to keep you playing, right?
Right. Yeah, they're very good at it.
And social media is kind of the same.
Huh.
That unpredictable reward, you never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, like you keep scrolling and scrolling, right,
Yeah.
just to see what's next.
Right. And the worst part is they're actually kind of hijacking our natural social drive.
Right.
Like we're wired to connect with people,
Mm-hmm.
but they're twisting that for profit.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that before.
Yeah, and that ties in perfectly with the work of Adam Alter. Have you ever heard of him?
I have, yeah.
He wrote that book, Irresistible.
Yes. That's about addiction. Yeah.
Exactly, all about behavioral addiction. And one of the most surprising things is he found that on average, people underestimate their phone use by about 3 hours a day.
Really?
Yeah. Like, think about how much time do you think you spend on your phone?
That's crazy. I definitely think I underestimate it.
Most people do.
Wow. So all that time,
Mhm.
it could be going towards, other stuff.
Exactly. And that's what digital minimalism is all about.
Okay.
It's not about being anti-tech.
Right.
It's about being intentional with it.
So choosing how we use it instead of letting it use us.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
And Cal Newport, he highlights 3 main principles of digital minimalism.
Okay, let's hear them.
So the first one is that clutter is costly.
Okay.
And that means we need to figure out what activities technology is actually supporting that are valuable to us
Mm-hmm.
and just cut out everything else.
So it's like decluttering our physical space,
Yes, exactly.
but for our digital lives.
That's a perfect way to put it.
I like that.
It's like, getting rid of all that junk that's just taking up space.
Right. So we can focus on the things that actually matter.
Exactly. The second principle is that optimization is important.
Okay.
So it's not just about what tech we use, but how we use it.
Okay. So like how we set up our phones or something.
Yeah, like think about your phone, right?
Uh-huh.
Most people just accept the default settings.
Yeah, that's me. I have no idea what most of the settings even do.
Right. But we should actually be thoughtfully designing how we interact with these tools.
Okay, I see what you mean, like being more intentional about, say, when we check social media.
Exactly. Like maybe instead of constantly scrolling on your phone, you only check it on your computer at a certain time.
That's a great idea.
Right. So you're not just mindlessly scrolling all day
Yeah,
long.
okay, I'm starting to get this.
Good. And then the third principle is that intentionality is satisfying.
Ooh, I like that one.
Yeah. It means it's actually the act of choosing what matters that makes us feel fulfilled.
Okay, that makes sense.
So, the book has all these stories about people who embraced digital minimalism.
Oh, cool. Tell me about some of them.
Yeah, like there's this guy named Tyler.
Okay.
He quit social media completely.
Wow. Cold turkey.
Yep. And you know what he did with all that extra time?
What?
He learned to play the ukulele.
Oh, that's awesome.
And he spent way more time with his family.
See, that's what I'm talking about. It's like you create space for the things you actually want to do,
Exactly.
but just haven't been making time for.
Yeah, exactly. There's also this other story about a guy named Adam.
Okay.
He actually ditched his smartphone altogether.
Wow, really?
Yeah, he wanted to set a good example for his kids.
That's a big commitment.
It is, but he found it was totally worth it.
So I guess what we're saying is that less can actually be more when it comes to technology.
Absolutely. It's like this idea of diminishing returns, right?
Mm-hmm.
Past a certain point, more technology doesn't equal more happiness.
That's a great point.
It can actually start to have the opposite effect.
And that's where digital minimalism comes in.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where technology is actually enhancing your life.
Instead of just adding more noise and distractions.
Exactly. And to help you find that sweet spot, Cal Newport recommends this 30-day digital declutter process.
Ooh, a 30-day challenge. I like it.
Yeah, it's like hitting the reset button on your digital life.
Okay, so how does it work?
Basically, you start by identifying all the optional technologies in your life,
Okay.
things you could go without for 30 days.
So like everything except maybe my work email.
Yeah, pretty much. Almost everything is optional for 30 days.
Okay. That's kind of scary, but also exciting.
Right. It's like an experiment to see what happens when you disconnect from all that stuff.
And then what? You just avoid them completely for a month.
Exactly. Like a digital detox.
Wow. That's serious commitment.
It is. But the key is, at the end of the 30 days, you don't just go back to your old habits.
Okay, so what do you do?
You only add back the technology that passes a very strict value test.
Interesting. So you're basically forcing yourself to be more intentional about the tech you let back into your life.
Exactly. And that's how you start to reclaim your time and attention.
I'm definitely intrigued by this 30-day challenge. I think it could be a real game changer.
I think so too.
So, are you in? Are you going to try with me?
I'm in.
Okay, awesome. It's a deal. We'll keep everyone updated on our progress. But for now, let's dive a little deeper into some of the specific strategies Cal Newport recommends for embracing digital minimalism.
Sounds good to me. Where should we start?
Well, I'm really curious about this idea of solitude that he keeps coming back to.
Yeah, that's a good one. It might seem a little counterintuitive in a book about technology.
Right. You'd think it would be all about apps and gadgets.
You would, but Newport actually argues that solitude is essential.
Okay, I'm listening.
He says it's crucial for deep thinking, even for creativity.
That's interesting. I definitely feel like I get my best ideas when I'm away from all the distractions.
Exactly. And he even uses the example of Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, what about him?
Well, during his presidency, he would escape to a cottage on the grounds of the soldiers' home.
Wow, so even the president needed to unplug sometimes.
He did. It gave him a much-needed break from all the pressures and distractions of leading a nation.
Especially during the Civil War, I can't even imagine.
Right. And it's something we can all learn from.
So how do we actually make time for solitude in our lives?
Well, Newport's a big fan of walking.
Walking.
Yeah.
Like just going for a walk.
Yeah. He sees it as a fantastic way to disconnect from the digital world.
Okay, yeah. I can see that.
You're just present with your thoughts and your surroundings.
No phone, no distractions, just you and the open road.
Exactly. He also recommends keeping a journal.
Oh, that's a good one.
Writing down your thoughts can help you process information, clarify your values,
Okay, yeah.
and gain deeper insights into your own life.
You know, I used to keep a journal when I was younger.
Really?
Yeah, but I haven't done it in years.
Maybe it's time to start that up again.
You know what? Maybe you're right. I'm always complaining about having too much on my mind.
It can be really helpful, you know?
Okay, I'm going to give it a try. What other solitude-enhancing practices does he talk about?
Well, he talks about leaving your phone at home when you go out.
Gasp. Like, without my phone.
Or at least, put it on airplane mode.
Okay, that's a little less scary.
So you're not constantly tempted to check it.
Right, because once you start scrolling, it's like game over.
Exactly. And he also suggests scheduling digital Sabbaths.
Digital Sabbaths. I like the sound of that.
Yeah, where you completely disconnect from technology for a full 24 hours.
Yeah, a whole day.
A whole day.
That sounds intense, but also kind of amazing.
It is.
It's like hitting the reset button on your brain.
Exactly. It can be a really powerful way to reconnect with the things that truly matter.
I'm definitely going to try that. So solitude's one big piece of the puzzle.
It is.
But what about, the social side of things?
Right. Well, Newport argues that reclaiming conversation is essential.
Okay, and we talked about this a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But can you remind me what exactly he means by that?
So it's about being more intentional about how we use digital communication tools.
Okay.
Prioritizing that high bandwidth conversation.
Right, instead of the low bandwidth connection we get on social media.
Exactly. Like, instead of just liking someone's post, maybe you pick up the phone and actually call them.
Ooh, radical. But I kind of like it. So what are some other ways we can make our communication more conversation-centric?
Well, one of his more radical suggestions is to drastically reduce or even eliminate likes and comments on social media.
Wait, really? But isn't that what social media is all about?
I know, right? It sounds crazy.
It does.
But he argues that those interactions, even though they seem harmless, they actually train our brains to believe that connection is enough.
So we're getting that quick hit of social validation,
Exactly.
but it's not really contributing to building stronger relationships.
Not really.
That's a good point. So how do we break free from the tyranny of the like button?
Well, he also suggests consolidating your texting.
Okay, what does that mean?
Basically being less available over text.
Oh, so like not responding right away.
Exactly.
That's interesting. I'd be curious to see how that would change my relationships.
Me too. And he also recommends trying phone conversations more often.
Like actual phone calls.
Yeah, or even setting office hours for calls.
What do you mean by that?
Like, you designate specific times when you're available for longer, more focused conversations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's like scheduling quality time for connection, just like we schedule other important things in our lives.
Exactly.
I like it. And then finally, there's this whole piece about leisure time, right?
Right. And Newport argues that we often fill our free time with low-quality digital distractions.
Ooh, that hits a little close to home. I'm definitely guilty of that.
I think a lot of us are. Like, we'll spend hours scrolling through social media or binge watching shows when we could be doing things that are more enriching.
Okay, so what does he suggest instead?
He's a big advocate for what he calls virtuous hobbies.
Virtuous hobbies.
Yeah, so these are things that might feel like work at times, but provide multiple levels of satisfaction.
Like what kind of things? Give me an example.
He talks about this blogger named Mr. Money Mustache. Have you ever heard of him?
I have, yeah. He's a guy who retired early, right?
That's him. And he spends free time doing things like welding, carpentry, even building his own house.
Wow, that's impressive.
Right. And Newport's point is that it's about finding things that challenge us, engage our minds and bodies.
So instead of zoning out in front of the TV, we should be picking up a new hobby or like joining a sports league.
Exactly. Or volunteering or learning a new skill. Anything that gets you out of your head and into the real world.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But this whole idea of digital minimalism, it's not just about limiting screen time, right?
No, it's not. It's about creating a life that's rich with meaningful experiences.
Deep relationships, fulfilling activities.
Exactly. And it's about using technology as a tool to enhance our lives, not dominate them.
I love that. So how do we actually make this happen? How do we join what Newport calls the attention resistance?
That's a great question. It's about actively resisting those forces that are constantly trying to capture our attention.
Right, those attention merchants we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. And, Newport argues that the way many of us use technology, especially social media, actually plays right into their hands.
Okay, I see what you mean. We've talked about how these platforms are designed to be addictive.
Right.
But how is our use of them a form of resistance?
Well, he points to that Facebook blog post from a few years ago.
The one that basically said, it's how you use the technology.
That's the one. And Newport argues that this statement, even though it seems harmless, actually reveals a weakness in their business model.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Explain that to me.
So their whole goal is to keep us engaged with their platforms for as long as possible.
Right. They want us scrolling and clicking and liking.
Exactly.
Well,
They want us generating data that they can use to target us with more content, more ads. But when we use these services intentionally, when we set limits, when we prioritize high-quality interaction over mindless consumption, we're actually going against their interests.
so we're like rebelling against the system by
Yep.
simply being more mindful and deliberate about how we use these tools.
Exactly. We're taking back control from the attention merchants.
I love that. It's like we're fighting for our right to focus, our right to disconnect, our right to be present in our own lives.
Exactly. And it all starts with making small changes in how we use technology every day.
So what are some practical ways we could put this resistance into action? Like, what can we actually do?
Well, one of the simplest things is deleting those social media apps from your phone.
You're serious. Just delete them.
Delete them. If they're not readily available, you're less likely to get sucked in.
Okay, out of sight, out of mind. What else?
He also recommends turning our devices into single-purpose computers.
Okay, how do we do that?
So there are tools like Freedom. Have you heard of that
I
before?
have. It lets you block distracting websites and apps, right?
Right. And you can even do it for certain periods of time.
Oh, I've heard that Zadie Smith used Freedom to write her novel, NW.
That's right. And it works.
So it's about creating a digital environment that supports our goals instead of constantly working against them.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
And he also emphasizes the importance of using social media like a professional.
What does that mean?
So instead of just endlessly scrolling through our feeds, we should have a plan.
A plan for social media.
Yeah, like what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals?
So it's like we're the CEO of our own digital lives, making strategic decisions about how to use our time and energy.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so that's social media. But what about news?
Newport is a big advocate for what he calls slow news consumption.
Slow news consumption. That sounds like the opposite of how most of us get our news these days. It's all about breaking news and instant updates.
Right. It definitely goes against the grain.
So what does he suggest?
He argues that this constant barrage of headlines and clickbait can be incredibly stressful.
Oh, totally. It keeps you in this constant state of anxiety.
Exactly. So he recommends limiting your news intake to specific times and sources.
Okay, so like maybe I only check the news once a day in the evening instead of constantly refreshing my feed.
Exactly. Avoid clickbait.
Yeah.
And actually take time to understand the issues, not just skim the headlines.
So quality over quantity. I can get behind that.
Good. And then finally, he even suggests considering a dumb phone.
A dumb phone. You mean like one of those old school phones that can only make calls and send texts?
Yep, that's the one. He highlights the example of Paul Graham, a venture capitalist, who made the switch and loved it.
Wow, that's pretty hardcore. But I guess it would force you to be more intentional about your tech use, right?
Right. And dumb phones are actually becoming more popular these days. There are even companies like Lightphone.
Light phone. Yeah, I've heard of them.
They're designing minimalist phones, specifically for people who want to escape digital overload.
It's amazing how this whole idea of digital minimalism is catching on. I think more and more people are realizing that we need to find a better way to live with technology.
I think you're right.
It's not about rejecting technology altogether
No, it's about using it in a way that supports our values and goals.
and allows us to live more meaningful and fulfilling lives.
Exactly.
This has been a great conversation so far. But I'm curious to hear how you see all of this connecting to the idea of living a meaningful life. What's the bigger picture here?
That's a great question. And Newport actually addresses this by circling back to the story of Samuel Morse and the invention of the telegraph.
The telegraph. That seems like a bit of a historical detour.
It might seem that way, but he uses it as a metaphor for the rapid pace of technological change
Okay.
and the unintended consequences that often accompany those innovations.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
Hmm.
So just like the telegraph revolutionized communication in the 19th century, the internet and smartphones have transformed how we live and interact in the 21st century.
Exactly. And just like people in Morse's time were grappling with the implications of this new technology, we're now trying to make sense of the impact these digital tools are having on our lives.
It's like history repeating itself, but on a much larger scale.
Right. And what's Newport's ultimate message about all of this?
I'm all ears.
He argues that we need to be more mindful and deliberate about how we integrate new technologies into our lives. We have a choice in how we use these tools.
Okay.
And we shouldn't just accept the defaults, that are often designed to exploit our attention and keep us hooked.
It's about reclaiming our agency and shaping our digital experiences to align with our values and goals.
Precisely.
I love that. It's like we're taking back control of our digital lives.
Exactly.
We're creating a world where technology serves us.
Rather than the other way around.
Well said.
And he believes that this is absolutely essential if we want to live meaningful and fulfilling lives in this digital age.
This has been an incredible journey into the world of digital minimalism so far. We've covered a lot of ground, from the problem of tech overload to the solutions offered by digital minimalism and the importance of joining the attention resistance. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'd love to hear your final thoughts. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from all of this?
That's a tough one. I think for me, the most compelling aspect of digital minimalism is that it offers a path to a more intentional and fulfilling life in the digital age. It's not about rejecting technology completely,
Right.
but about using it in a way that supports our values, enhances our relationships, and allows us to focus on the things that truly matter.
It's about taking back control of our digital lives
Exactly.
and creating a world where technology serves us, not the other way around.
Well said.
Well, this has been a truly inspiring deep dive into digital minimalism. But before we go, I have one last thought for our listeners to ponder. How might your life change if you spent less time reacting to digital distractions and more time focused on what truly matters to you? It's something to think about.
It is, and I hope that sparks a deeper conversation about how we can all live more intentionally in this digital age.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into digital minimalism. We hope you found it informative and inspiring, and maybe even a little bit life-changing. Remember, there's a better way to live with technology. It's time to discover the power of digital minimalism.
Until next time, keep diving deep. It really is. And some people in the book even took it further.
Oh, how so?
They came up with, specific operating procedures for their tech use.
Interesting. Like what?
So some people decided they'd only check social media on the weekends. Others limited podcasts to just their commutes.
Okay.
Or had a no text messages during dinner rule.
I like that one. It's about setting boundaries.
Right. Exactly.
Using tech on our terms, not just letting it rule our lives.
Right.
And speaking of boundaries, I'm really curious about this whole idea of solitude that Newport emphasizes.
Yeah.
It seems kind of counterintuitive in a book about technology,
It does, doesn't it?
But he argues that it's essential.
He does. For deep thinking. For creativity.
It's about giving our brains a break from all that digital stimulation, right?
Exactly.
Newport even uses the example of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, he talks about how Lincoln would escape to a cottage
Iconic.
on the grounds of the soldier's home.
During his presidency.
Yeah.
Wow, so even the president needed to unplug sometimes.
He did. It offered him a much-needed break from all the pressures and distractions of leading a nation during the Civil War.
It makes you realize that maybe solitude isn't a luxury, but a necessity,
Right.
especially in today's world.
Right.
And it connects to this modern research on the default network in our brains.
So yeah, the DeBell network.
Which activates when we're not focused on a specific task.
It's fascinating stuff, right?
It is. And this network is crucial for processing social information,
Right.
making sense of our experiences, building empathy.
All that good stuff.
So if we're constantly bombarded with information from our devices, are we basically depriving our brains of the solitude it needs to function at its best?
That's exactly what Newport suggests.
And here's the irony. Studies show that more time on social media often correlates with increased feelings of isolation.
It's crazy, right?
It is. We're using technology to connect, but it's making us feel more alone.
It's a real paradox.
It is.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about the quality of those connections.
Right.
Speaking of which, I remember Newport talks about the difference between low bandwidth connection and high bandwidth conversation.
Yeah, that's a key distinction.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. Low bandwidth connection is what we often see on social media.
Okay.
Short, superficial exchanges, likes, comments.
It's easy, but it doesn't really allow for deep interaction.
It's like the social media equivalent of a quick hello in passing.
Exactly.
Whereas high bandwidth conversation is what we experience in the real world.
Okay.
Face-to-face conversations, phone calls, even handwritten letters.
So it's richer, more nuanced.
Exactly.
It allows for a deeper level of connection.
Right. And so the question becomes, how do we make our communication more conversation-centric, as Newport calls it?
That's the million-dollar question. What does he suggest?
Well, he has some pretty radical suggestions,
Okay, I'm intrigued.
like drastically reducing or even eliminating likes and comments on social media.
Wait, seriously?
I know, it sounds crazy.
It does. But isn't that, like, what social media is all about?
It seems that way, right? But he argues that those interactions, while seemingly harmless, actually train our brains to believe that connection is enough.
So we get that quick hit of social validation,
Exactly.
but it doesn't actually contribute to building those strong, meaningful relationships.
Right. It's like settling for a cheap imitation of connection instead of the real thing.
Ooh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So by cutting back on those low-bandwidth interactions, we create space for higher quality conversations.
Precisely.
I see what you mean. So instead of just liking a friend's photo, we might actually pick up the phone and call them.
Exactly. Or meet up for coffee.
Or go for a walk together. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
He also suggests consolidating texting.
He does. Being less available so you create a sense of longing.
Longing.
For what? For real-world interaction.
Okay, so we're not ignoring people completely, just being more intentional about when and how we connect.
Exactly.
And for those times when texting is necessary, he recommends setting office hours for calls.
Yeah, like a professor might do.
That's a great idea.
It's about scheduling quality time for connection, just like we schedule other important things in our lives.
I love that. It all comes back to that overarching theme of intentionality.
It does.
This has been really insightful. But what about leisure time?
That's a great question.
How does digital minimalism approach the way we relax and have fun?
Well, Newport argues that we often underestimate how much time we waste with low-quality leisure,
Okay.
like mindlessly scrolling through social media or binge-watching shows.
Ouch. That hits a little close to home. I know I'm guilty of that sometimes.
I think a lot of us are. And he proposes shifting our focus to virtuous hobbies instead.
Virtuous hobbies, what are those?
These are things that might feel like work at times, but they provide multiple levels of satisfaction
Okay.
and contribute to a richer life overall.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, he talks about Pete, the blogger behind Mr. Money Mustache.
Oh yeah, the guy who retired early.
That's him. He spends his free time welding, doing carpentry. He even built his own house.
Wow, that's impressive. I'm not sure I'm ready to build my own house just yet.
Right, but it's about finding things that challenge us, engage our minds and bodies, and leave us feeling fulfilled rather than just entertained.
So maybe instead of zoning out in front of the TV, we should be picking up a new hobby, or joining a sports league, or volunteering.
Exactly.
And those virtuous hobbies often involve a connection to the physical world, right?
They often do. It's about getting our hands dirty, creating something tangible.
Experiencing the satisfaction of mastering a new skill.
Exactly. And Newport also highlights the importance of social leisure. Like, he talks about the rise of groups like CrossFit and F3.
I've heard of those. They're fitness groups, right?
Right, but they also have this really strong social component. It's about finding ways to connect with others that go beyond just liking their posts online.
It's about having shared experiences, building those real-world connections.
Precisely. He even mentions the resurgence of interest in board games.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's amazing how something as simple as playing a game together can create such a strong sense of connection.
It's true. I love playing board games with friends. It's so much more engaging than just staring at our phones.
Right. And it's a great way to unplug and have some fun.
This is making me realize that digital minimalism isn't just about limiting screen time.
It's not.
It's about creating a life that's rich with meaningful experiences, deep relationships, and fulfilling activities.
You got it. And it's about using technology as a tool to enhance our lives, not dominate them.
Speaking of using technology intentionally, I remember Newport talks about joining what he calls the attention resistance.
Oh, yeah, the attention resistance.
What exactly does that mean?
It's about actively resisting the forces that are constantly trying to capture our attention.
And control our digital experiences.
Exactly. He argues that the way many of us use technology, especially social media, plays right into the hands of these companies.
Okay, I see what you mean. We've talked about how these platforms are designed to be addictive, but how is our use of them a form of resistance?
Well, it goes back to that Facebook blog post.
The one that said is how you use the technology.
That's the one. And Newport argues that this statement, while seemingly harmless, actually reveals a weakness in their business model.
Oh, interesting. Okay, explain that.
So their whole goal is to keep us engaged with their platforms for as long as possible. They want us scrolling, clicking on ads, generating data they can use to target us with more content. But when we use these services intentionally, setting limits, prioritizing high-quality interaction over mindless consumption, we're actually going against their interests.
So it's like we're rebelling against the system by simply being more mindful and deliberate about how we use these tools.
Exactly. It's about taking back control from the attention merchants, as Tim Wu calls them in his book, The Attention
I
Merchants.
love that. It's like we're fighting for our right to focus, our right to disconnect, our right to be present in our own lives. What are some ways we can put this resistance into action?
Well, one of the most straightforward things is deleting social media apps from your phone.
Just delete them, really.
Yep. When they're not readily available, we're less likely to get sucked in.
Out of sight, out of mind. What else?
He also recommends turning our devices into single-purpose computers.
Okay. Like, what does that look like in practice?
So using tools like Freedom, which allows you to block distracting websites and apps for specific periods of time.
Oh, I've heard of that. Didn't Zadie Smith use freedom to write her novel, NWA?
That's the one.
Wow.
And Newport points out that this approach, while maybe seeming counterintuitive in our age of multitasking, can be incredibly effective for enhancing focus and productivity.
It's about creating a digital environment that supports our goals instead of constantly working against them.
Exactly.
Are there other ways to be part of this attention resistance?
Definitely. He emphasizes the importance of using social media like a professional.
What does that mean exactly?
Having a plan, setting goals, avoiding getting bogged down in the noise.
So instead of endlessly scrolling through our feeds, we should be more intentional about what we're looking for and how we're engaging with the content.
Exactly. He uses the example of Jennifer Gregrail, a social media expert who approaches it like a job. She has a plan, sets goals, avoids the noise.
That's a great model to follow. It's like we're the CEO of our own digital lives, making strategic decisions about how to use our time and energy. This mindset also applies to how we consume news, right?
Right. Newport's a big advocate for slow news consumption.
Slow news consumption. That sounds like the opposite of how most of us get our news these days. It's all about breaking news and instant updates.
It definitely goes against the grain.
So what does he suggest?
He argues that this constant barrage of headlines and clickbait can be incredibly stressful and anxiety-provoking. It keeps us in a state of perpetual reaction.
So it's about being more selective and thoughtful about the news we consume instead of getting swept up in the 24/7 news cycle.
Precisely. He recommends limiting our news intake to specific times and sources,
Okay.
avoiding clickbait, and taking time to understand the issues, not just skim the headlines.
Makes sense. It's about quality over quantity. Taking the time to really digest the information rather than just being bombarded with it all the time.
Exactly. And he even suggests considering a dumb phone.
A dumb phone. One of those old school phones that can only make calls and send texts.
Yep, that's the one. He highlights the example of Paul Graham, a venture capitalist who made the switch and found it incredibly liberating.
Wow, that's a pretty bold move. But I can see how it would force you to be more intentional about your tech use.
Right. And dumb phones are becoming more popular these days as people realize the downsides of smartphone addiction. There are even companies now, like Lightphone, designing minimalist phones specifically for people who want to escape digital overload.
That's fascinating. It seems like this whole idea of digital minimalism is gaining traction as more and more people are feeling overwhelmed by technology.
It definitely seems to be resonating with a lot of people. I think there's a growing awareness that we need to find a better way to live with technology.
This deep dive has been incredibly eye-opening. It's made me realize that digital minimalism is about so much more than just reducing screen time. It's about reclaiming our attention, our focus, our agency in a world that's constantly trying to distract and manipulate us.
You hit the nail on the head. It's about creating a digital life that serves us, not the other way around.
Well said. But I'm curious, how does this all connect to living a meaningful life?
That's a great question. And, Newport addresses this by circling back to the story of Samuel Morse and the invention of the telegraph.
The telegraph. That seems like a bit of a historical detour.
It might seem that way, but he uses it as a metaphor for the rapid pace of technological change
Okay.
and the unintended consequences that often accompany these innovations.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So, just like the telegraph revolutionized communication in the 19th century, the internet and smartphones have transformed how we live and interact in the 21st century.
Exactly. And just like people in Morse's time were grappling with the implications of this new technology, we're now trying to make sense of the impact these digital tools are having on our lives.
That's a powerful analogy.
Huh?
What is Newport's ultimate message about all of this?
He argues that we need to be more mindful and deliberate about how we integrate new technologies into our lives. We have a choice in how we use these tools and shouldn't just accept the defaults that are often designed to exploit our attention and keep us hooked.
It's about reclaiming our agency
Right.
and shaping our digital experiences to align with our values and goals.
Precisely. And he believes this is essential if we want to live meaningful and fulfilling lives in the digital age.
This has been an incredible journey into the world of digital minimalism. We've covered a lot of ground, from the problem of tech overload to the solutions offered by digital minimalism and the importance of joining the attention resistance. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'd love to hear your final thoughts. What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from all of this?
For me, the most compelling aspect of digital minimalism is that it offers a path to a more intentional and fulfilling life in the digital age. It's not about rejecting technology completely, but using it in a way that supports our values, enhances our relationships, and allows us to focus on the things that truly matter.
It's about taking back control of our digital lives
Exactly.
and creating a world where technology serves us, not the other way around.
Well said.
Well, this has been a truly inspiring deep dive into digital minimalism. But before we go, I have one last thought for our listeners to ponder. How might your life change if you spent less time reacting to digital distractions and more time focused on what truly matters to you? It's something to think about.
It is, and one that I hope will spark a deeper conversation about how we can all live more intentionally in this digital age.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into digital minimalism. We hope you found it informative and inspiring, and maybe even a little bit life-changing. Remember, there's a better way to live with technology. It's time to discover the power of digital minimalism.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
Yeah.
It's a question we can all ask ourselves, and what's great about Newport's book is that he doesn't just leave us with the theory.
Right. He gives us actual tactics to put these principles into practice.
Exactly, like real-world strategies.
Okay, so let's talk tactics then. What are some practical steps we can take to, reclaim our time and attention?
Well, he starts by emphasizing the importance of spending time alone. Solitude. He argues it's crucial for self-awareness, for processing our experiences, for connecting with our deeper values.
And we talked about Lincoln escaping to his cottage, but how can we incorporate more solitude into our busy lives?
Newport's a big fan of walking.
Walking.
Yeah, he sees it as a way to disconnect from the digital world.
Okay, yeah. Just be present with your thoughts, your surroundings.
Exactly. No phone, no distractions, just you and the open road.
I do love a good walk. I always feel more clear-headed afterward.
He also recommends keeping a journal.
Oh, journaling.
Yeah, writing down your thoughts, processing information, clarifying your values.
Gaining deeper insights into your own life.
Exactly.
I used to keep a journal when I was younger.
Really?
Yeah, but I haven't done it in years.
Maybe it's time to pick it back up again.
You know what? Maybe you're right. I'm always complaining about having too much on my mind. It could help.
It can be really helpful, like having a conversation with yourself.
But on paper, free from the distractions.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm sold. What other solitude-enhancing practices does he talk about?
Well, he talks about leaving your phone at home when you go out.
Gasp. Without my phone.
Or at least putting it on airplane mode.
Okay, that's slightly less terrifying.
Right, so you're not constantly tempted to check it.
Because once you start scrolling, it's all over.
He also suggests scheduling digital Sabbaths.
Digital Sabbaths?
Yeah, where you disconnect from technology for a full 24 hours.
Wow, a whole day.
A whole day.
That sounds intense, but also kind of amazing. Like a total reset.
It can be really powerful.
The solitude's one big piece of the puzzle.
It is. But of course, we can't forget about the social aspect.
Reclaiming conversation.
Yes. Newport argues it's essential for building strong relationships and a more connected society.
And we talked about this before, but remind me, how do we actually make our communication more conversation-centric?
Well, one of his more radical suggestions is drastically reducing or even eliminating likes and comments on social media.
So like breaking free from the tyranny of the like button?
Exactly.
But
He also suggests consolidating your texting,
okay. What does that mean?
being less available over text.
Oh, so like not responding right away.
Exactly. It might seem counterintuitive, but it actually can create space for richer conversations.
Hmm. Interesting. I have to see how that plays out in real life.
And he also recommends trying, phone conversations more often.
Like actual phone calls.
Yeah. Or even setting office hours for calls.
Office hours for
Yeah.
phone calls.
Yeah, like you designate specific times when you're available for longer, more focused conversations.
Oh, okay. So it's like scheduling quality time for connection, just like we schedule other important things in our lives.
Exactly.
I like that. And then finally, there's the whole piece about leisure time.
Right. Newport argues we often fill our free time with low-quality digital distractions.
Yeah, the mindless scrolling, the binge watching.
When we could be doing things that are more challenging, more rewarding, more fulfilling.
And he calls these virtuous hobbies.
Exactly. Things that connect us to the physical world, engage our creativity, give us a sense of accomplishment.
It's about rediscovering the joy of making things rather than just passively consuming.
Precisely.
I love that. What are some examples of those virtuous hobbies?
He's a big advocate for anything that involves using your hands. Woodworking, gardening, crafting, cooking.
Okay, yeah, I can see how those would be more engaging than just staring at a screen.
He also encourages joining groups like book clubs, sports teams, or volunteer organizations.
So things that get us out into the real world, connecting with others face to face.
Exactly. It's about finding those sources of community, shared purpose, real interaction that can be so enriching.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. It feels like digital minimalism is about so much more than just reducing our screen time.
It is.
It's about creating a life that's full of meaningful experiences,
Strong relationships.
fulfilling activities.
Exactly. It's about using technology as a tool to enhance our lives, not letting it control us.
Well said. This deep dive into digital minimalism has been a real game changer for me. I'm walking away with a whole new perspective on my relationship with technology.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
The key is to keep experimenting, keep reflecting, and keep striving to create a digital life that aligns with your values and goals.
I love that. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into digital minimalism. We hope you found it informative, inspiring, and maybe even a little bit life-changing.
We did cover a lot.
We did. But remember, there's a better way to live with technology. It's time to discover the power of digital minimalism.
Until next time, keep diving deep.